morning.
Good morning.
It won't sit. That's all right. I really want to express my appreciation to Musai Roshi for his talk yesterday. I've been giving the subject of that talk quite a bit of thought recently because basically I'm a person without a future. Now, yes, I know. I never had a future. Nobody in this room has a future. But I have a future in the sense of, no, I'm probably never going to get on a jet plane again. I'm not going to go visit anybody. I got no vacations coming up. I'm not going to write a book. I'm somewhat limited in my choices these days. It's interesting, there was an article in the New York Times that appeared in the op-ed section written by Oliver Sacks, whom I'm sure many of you know about. He is now 81 years old and he has been diagnosed with terminal cancer and has only a few months to live. So he was talking about what his expectations out of life were. And he has made the decision not to watch the evening news anymore.
Good idea.
And he's not going to participate in any more discussions about climate change or the situation in the Middle East. But he is going to go ahead and publish all the books that he's got in the pipeline and carry on his life pretty much as he always has. I know that for myself, I have a tendency to sometimes slip into nihilism. That's nihilism. Nothing matters. Nothing is of any importance. Because after all, I do not believe in an afterlife, heaven or hell, or any kind of reincarnation, or any kind of continuation whatsoever. And that once my consciousness disappears, that is a big hole. Except I won't even know that. So one might well ask, as I do sometimes myself, what the hell? Why do anything? Why get out of bed in the morning? But as Roshi pointed out in his talk yesterday, you know, we have a dual practice. That is sometimes difficult to reconcile. And it consists of a practice of personal expansion, of personal transcendence, but it is also a practice of the bodhisattva. And the practice of the bodhisattva is to work to save all sentient beings. And, as Roshi pointed out yesterday, to do so with the help of the 16 precepts. There was another article that appeared this week that really disturbed me greatly, and that was something that Roshi referred to yesterday, which is the article in the Atlantic Monthly, this issue, on ISIS. And it is a very long article in which the author made some effort to find out exactly what that belief system consisted in. And the only thing I can say about it is that it is diametrically opposed to the belief system that we practice. It is a harrowing example of group psychosis. And yes, Oliver Sacks is right. There's not a lot of hope or a lot to be gained from thinking about that or bothering yourself with it. But I still can continue to do so, and I still watch the evening news. I have resolved since the beginning of my disease to try to live my life exactly as I always have. And I'm going to continue to do so. In counterbalance to the article in the Atlantic Monthly, a little over a week ago, David Loy published a new book. And this book, I think, is one of the most interesting and most important books on Buddhism that has been published in a long time. Now, you've heard Roshi and I talk about David Loy from time to time. He's an American, even though he studied at King's College at London University. He's 2 years younger than I am, just to say I think he's about 67. He took up Zen practice at a relatively early age in his life, and he had the very good fortune to study with Aitken and then with Count Yamada, who we all know as the translator of the Gateless Gate that we use in the koan study, or we did until recently. Well, I confess, I keep going back to Yamada. I'm familiar with him, I'm comfortable with him, and I like the way that he translated some of those koans. Shibayama, I think, has better commentaries, but I think the translation of Yamada's work is, I prefer.
He's also the head of a rather big lineage with a lot of American successors.
Yes. David Loy received Inca from him. And David Loy has spent his life publishing a large number of books. One of my personal favorites, which is hardly ever gets mentioned at all, is his Buddhist History of the West. It's a history of Western civilization written from a Buddhist point of view. And the subtitle of the book is Studies in Lack. I was reminded of that book when Roshi yesterday was talking about greed. You know, it's funny, as Roshi was talking about, as he was talking yesterday, it occurred to me, I remembered a book that many years ago that I read when I first started Zen practice. It was published, I think, in around 1990 or so. And it was written by a fellow by the name of Kyogen Carlton, who received Inca from Kennett Roshi at Shasta Abbey. in 1978. And the title of the book was Zen in the American Grain. And it was a collection of Dharma talks that was intended to show how Western culture was actually quite compatible with the Dharma, which is true. But the book itself was an effort to portray Zen as being acceptable to the democratic, capitalist culture of this country. Now, we're going in the other direction. Now we're talking about maybe things aren't so hot in American culture anymore, and maybe it doesn't recommend itself nearly as highly to Zen students. And
What's the name of Loy's new book?
A New Buddhist Path. And that is the point of this new book. Let me read you some passages that I think would help explain this. Buddhism is encountering its greatest challenge ever. The most successful civilization in human history, whose powerful technologies and formidable institutions offer apparently limitless possibilities, along with unprecedented perils. The Mahayana scholar Edward Concept said that Buddhism hasn't had an original idea in 1,000 years. Although I'm dubious about his dates, in the 13th century, Zen master Dogen revolutionized traditional ways of conceptualizing the Dharma. Concept's basic point remains a challenge to Buddhism, even if it applies only to the last 700 years. It is the encounter with modernity the best thing that has happened to Buddhism in a very long time? The prevalent Western worldview promotes individualism and narcissism. Its economic system encourages greed, and society as a whole seems to be entranced in consumerist addictions and fantasies. We need to revitalize this ancient wisdom that can point us back in the right direction. On the other side, however, the main concern is to make Buddhism more relevant to contemporary society by secularizing it, replacing its Iron Age mythological roots with a worldview more compatible with science and other modern ways of knowing. Sure, modernity has its problems, but we must build on the best of what it has discovered. One of the crucial issues for contemporary Buddhism is enlightenment. Another word that Loy uses a lot is transcendence. Although it's difficult to imagine a Buddhism without it, there is an ambiguity about the nature of enlightenment that is becoming increasingly problematic as Buddhism globalizes and modernizes. The sense of self is a psychological and social construct that can be deconstructed and reconstructed, and that needs to be deconstructed and reconstructed. Because the delusion of a separate self is the source of our most problematic dukkha, or suffering. So, you know, the thing that Loy is talking about, and which Kyogen Carlson discovered, is that Buddhism can reinforce the American preoccupation with independent self and separate self, and without regard to society and without regard to other people. That's one of the reasons why I think that Maizumi and Thich Nhat Hanh both emphasize the Sangha so heavily, particularly within American culture. They both said, and I think it was more of a wish than a pronouncement, that the Buddha of the West will become the Sangha. It must become the Sangha. That's the argument that David Loy is making. This is not a big book. It's only about 170 pages long. But he covers the terrain admirably. I was particularly interested in what he had to say about karma and reincarnation. Because without transcendence, reincarnation or rebirth doesn't make a lot of sense. And he spends the first part of this book talking a great deal about transcendence and its lack. Now, I'm not going to get into that argument. I want to talk about what he says about karma and rebirth, because I found that to be particularly stimulating and applicable to my present situation. Rebirth has always had a problem. And we've discussed this problem here before. And that problem is the Buddhist doctrine of no self. And the doctrine of impermanence. What is transmitted from generation to generation if rebirth is to operate? How is karma carried forward into the future if there is nothing permanent or substantial to carry it? David Loy has an answer to that question. And I think it's really interesting. And it caused me to think about it quite a lot since I read it a few days ago. He starts off by asking the question, instead of thinking about karma in terms of something that we have or something that we carry, something that is created by our intentions and by our activities, why don't we think about karma as something that we are? We don't have karma or carry karma. We are karma. And he points to the 5 skandhas, which the Buddha, of course, taught constituted what we call the self, and which are impermanent and ever-changing. But they are principles of organization. And you know, we recite the 5 skandhas in the Heart Sutra every time we say it. There is form, there is perception, sensation, there is perception, discrimination, and consciousness. Now, that's how our particular recitation has been translated. And that translation was made by Bernie Glassman back in the late 90s. I remember when the decision was made to change over to this new translation, or what at that time was a new translation. And the skanda, the particular skanda that David Loy talks about with respect to karma, is the 4th one, which we know as discrimination. It is more commonly translated as mental formations. And these are all types of mental habits, thoughts, ideas, opinions, prejudices, compulsions, and decisions. The word I like to use for this, I may not be correct, I have to think about this, but it occurred to me as I was reading this, as David Loy's account of it. It's your personality. I think that the 4th skanda is basically your personality. And it is that part of our self that carries karma, or doesn't carry it, it is karma. And if we look at it that way, karma becomes something that we don't have to wait for it to be assuaged. We can work on our personality right now. And many of us are working on it. Let's see, let me find this quote. Another way to say it is that karma is not something the self has, rather it is what the sense of self is. Because my sense of self is transformed by my conscious choices, just as my body is composed of the food eaten and digested, so I am reconstructed by my consistent, repeated mental attitudes. By choosing to change what motivates me, I change the kind of person I am. What is clear is that karma as how to transform my life situation by transforming my motivations right now is not a fatalistic doctrine, but an empowering teaching. Being responsible for what happens to us does not mean accepting passively the problematic circumstances of our lives. Rather, we cultivate the responsibility to improve our situations by addressing them more proactively. As I was reading this, I was thinking to myself, you know, I'm a parent, as many of us here are, and I have 2 kids, and both of them have my personality to some extent.
Yay!
You know, they acquired it, I'm sure, first of all through my DNA, and they also acquired it through my tutelage, unfortunately. I can't think of a better way of, you know, giving my children my karma than by contributing to their raising. Now, David Lloyd doesn't say that. But it occurred to me that, that answers that question. In my mind, it does anyway. And all we have to do is think of karma as our personality and as the four skandha.
I would just like to point out how congruent that teaching is with psychology, with
Yeah.
Western psychology.
Yes.
They're practically the same thing.
That's right. That's right. But don't go too far,
Okay.
because David Lloyd has some hard things about psychotherapy.
Good, good. Well, I can't wait to read the book.
I mean, he believes.
Well, I didn't mean psychotherapy necessarily. I meant psychology
Okay.
as a study.
Right. Right.
So I'd like to add something here that's helped me tremendously through the last, many years now in my life. This is a big thing with Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's very prevalent in his teachings and how the people that follow him interact. He doesn't think of karma as rebirth, but as a continuation. So we even have a song that, I did when I was at them, that we would sing, "I plant a seed of love in you," and it would go on. So your mental formation now, but like you said with your children, you interact with someone that doesn't die, that continues and continues. So I keep that with me all the time, that all of my actions now, even with my grandchildren. And that's why when, you talk about your passing away, you're always going to be here.
Sure. That's exactly right. You're absolutely right. Now, I may be drawing more out of this than, David Lloyd would like to say. But I think, this book is filled with this kind of stuff. I am really pleased to have it in my hands before I'm gone, because it answers a lot of questions. But he sees the current tug of war here in the West as between the Iron Age mythology of Buddhism and psychology or psychotherapy, or the way that we have approached it here in the West. He thinks that there is a third way to do this, and that is what this book is trying to uncover. And he is inviting everybody to talk about it. And he said, of course, he says that the situation is kind of dire because we have got to make some changes about some things fairly rapidly. And I hope to hell it's not in the ISIS direction, which is an answer.